Because I said so. Because I said so. Would it be all right this morning if I preached to you on these 4 words? Because I said so. Huh? Would it be all right? Is that going to be too traumatic for some people in the room? The flashback to childhood experiences of your mom or dad not giving you the real answer and just saying, because I said so. I want you to realize this morning that these words are not words coming from me. These words are words spoken by God. Because I said so. In fact, turn to your neighbor and in your best God voice, say this. Because I said so. Oh, some of y'all try to get real deep. Why is it that we tuck our chin into our chest when we try to talk deeply? Because I said so. Well, why is it we do that? And some of you all were smart enough that you were like, no, I'm coming to God like God did to Elijah. Because I said so. You don't come in the loud and the boom, I come in the whisper. But listen, because I said so. See, maybe this title stings just a little bit because it hits a little bit too close to home with what God is teaching you in your life right now. Maybe God has been telling you to do something and you're like, but why? Maybe he's telling you to share your testimony with a coworker or someone else you come in contact with and you're like, but why? Maybe he's saying to me, you need to trust me. And you're like, but why? Maybe he's telling you need to pay for somebody's gas when you see them at a gas station looking like they're having the worst day in the world. And you question God and say, but why? Maybe God's telling you to pray for someone. Wakes you up in the middle of the night. I don't know if you've ever had that, but 2:30, 3 o'clock, that time of the night where you're like, I was just getting into some really good sleep. And God wakes you up and gives you someone to pray for. And you're like, but why? Maybe God's telling you, be still and know. And you're like, but why? And maybe God's response back to you is simply, because I said so. Maybe you keep asking God why you need to forgive someone. And he keeps saying, because I said so. And that person may be someone else, but maybe the person you really need to forgive is you. And you keep asking God, why do I need to forgive myself? And he just keeps responding, because I said so. Maybe he keeps telling you to let something go or to give up something or someone, and you keep asking him why. And he says, because I said so. Now, for the same parents who answered and raised your hand and said, yes, I used that because I said so, in an honest moment, those of us who have used that phrase would probably admit that we used it because we really didn't have an answer. We didn't know. Any parents in here that have spoken too soon? Like you tell your kids something and then they ask you why and you realize that was the dumbest thing. I should never have told them that, but now I have to show them a person of integrity and I can't say that I changed my mind, so I'm going to stick to this all the way through. So you're like, just because I said so. In an honest moment, you don't really have a good answer. But please understand this morning that God isn't saying this because he doesn't have the right answer. In fact, it's a lot more likely that he's answering another way that my dad used to give to me, and I've used countless times on my own kids. Listen to me closely. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. God, why? Why is this happening? Why are you telling me to do this? Why is this going on in my life? And it's not so much that he's saying because I said so. It's more like he's saying you wouldn't understand even if I told you. God, why are you asking me to do this? Why are you asking me to give this up? Why are you asking me to trust you in this area of my life? Why are you asking me to give up control, the one thing I thought I've had my entire life? Why, God? Why are you asking all of these things? And you keep asking a question, looking for an answer to your why. And maybe God's response to you this morning is simply, you wouldn't understand even if I told you. See, what we were saying to our kids is that it won't make sense right now. When you become a little more mature, you might understand the context of what I'm telling you. When you get on the other side of this, it will make more sense. But right now, you won't understand it even if I tell you. You all know what I'm talking about? Like some kids have some questions and you're like, you're 4. I can't tell you about the birds and the bees right now. You wouldn't understand it even if I told you. Listen, I think that's for somebody this morning. You've been asking God, why God? Why does this have to happen this way? Why did this have to happen? Why do I have to do it this way? And God's response back to you is simply this: if I told you, it wouldn't make sense to you anyway. Because my ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts, declares the Lord. What he's saying to you this morning is, you're not quite mature enough in your understanding of who I am to explain to you why I need to do it this way. You're not quite old enough in your faith to understand it. And if I started to tell you exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing in your life right now, you just become more confused than ever and decide you're just going to walk away from it all. You need to wait. I promise you, on the other side of this, you'll understand why I asked you to do it this way. You wouldn't understand it even if I told you. Would it be all right if we go back to Exodus chapter 3 again this week? That's where we were last week. If you said no, too bad. I don't have anything else planned. Some of you have PTSD from my exit strategy series that I did in the book of Exodus. Can you believe that's been 2 years ago? 2 years ago. And some of you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But for those that have been with us for a while, we took months, almost an entire year, going through the book of Exodus. But we're going to go back there this week for something I believe God wants to share with us a little bit differently. Exodus chapter 3, continuing where we left off last week, verse 13, God said to Moses, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? He said, suppose I go. Think about this for just a moment. Moses is speaking to God through a burning bush that is not being consumed in the middle of nowhere. There is a bush on fire that Moses is having a conversation with, and he's still not convinced he wants to do what God has called him to do. Why is it that even in the miraculous, we're still reluctant? Now, some of you have been like, well, I've never seen a miracle before. Take a deep breath. That was a miracle. Listen, some of you have seen greater miracles in your life, but just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean they're not there. Just because you didn't see a miracle take place doesn't mean a miracle didn't happen. Listen, the odds of you even being here in the first place when your parents did what they did to create you is 1 in billions. Anybody else could have been created in that moment, but God chose to see you created. That was a miracle. Not just by chance. The fact that your mother was able to carry you to the place where you could sustain life is a miracle. You have seen miracles in your own life. Some of you have seen greater miracles, the fact that you're even here this morning, that some other people have seen miracles. But even in the miraculous, even seeing God do amazing things, we're still like, but I'm still not sure I want to do that for you. Some have seen relatives cured. Some have seen people who were sick that weren't even supposed to be here anymore. You've seen it happen, but it passed some time ago, and we lose the luster of the miracle because of our current circumstances. And that's where Moses is sitting today. Why is it even in the middle of the miraculous that we're still reluctant? He's like, I'm still not sold on going. But hypothetically, if I did go, who do I tell the elders sent me? What is your name? Now, let's cut Moses a little bit of slack here. This wasn't an unreasonable request. See, when God appeared to Abraham, God said, I am the Almighty God, El Shaddai. Abraham also called God Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Hagar referred to God as, you are the God who sees me. Jacob referred to God as El Elohe or El Bethel. God had revealed himself to others. So the expectation of others was that God would also reveal himself to Moses if it was really God who sent him in the first place. But notice that Moses created a hypothetical from a hypothetical. Suppose I go, hypothetically, and what if they ask me, hypothetical? Moses didn't know they would ask him. He thinks they might ask him. What was Moses really concerned about? What was he really worried about in asking this question? God, suppose I go. And even if I go, even if I leave my place of security and my place of familiarity and I go to them and I say to them that you have sent me, what should I tell them your name is? What is he really, really saying to God here? Well, I believe he's saying back to God, I'm worried the people will reject me. I'm worried that the people will reject me. God, even if I go, even if I tell them, what will I say to them when they question my authority to have this conversation with them? Anyone else in here other than me struggle with rejection? We probably all do. All of us in some season or form in our life struggle with some rejection that we deal with. See, rejection keeps us from being willing to venture outside of the walls of what's familiar. That's why we stay stuck, because we're afraid if I go outside of the walls of familiarity, someone might reject me and it's just going to send me back here anyway. So why don't I just stay here anyway? I don't have to risk the rejection. See, rejection places the opinions of others higher than the promises of God. Let me say it again. Rejection places the opinions of others higher than the promises of God. Listen, if we're not careful, we'll get so caught up in what we think others might think about God's calling in our life that we'll talk ourselves right out of it. We will get to the place where we will think that someone might say something about me that would bring rejection. So the fact that they might do it in my hypothetical situation is proof enough to me to say I shouldn't do it in the first place, so I'll talk myself right out of it. See, his reluctance was to go based on a fear that they might reject him. And for those who struggle with fear and with rejection, our favorite place to live is a place I call hypothetical land. Hypothetical land. Listen, use that with someone when they begin to tell you, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? Just tell them you are living in hypothetical land. Now listen, don't say it's snarky. You might get slapped. I'm saying do it out of love. You are living in a hypothetical situation that is not even going to happen potentially. Moses was willing to allow the people to stay in bondage because of his what if. He was willing to allow these millions of people to remain in bondage, all because of his what if. His what if. Think about that for just a moment. How does God want to use you in the life of other people if you'll just stop saying, what if? Listen, if God was worried about the what if, he wouldn't have called you to it in the first place. God isn't concerned about your what if. He's not caught off guard. When you say, what if, God? He's not up there like, you know what? I never thought of that. I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. No, God calls you knowing he's giving you everything that's necessary in order that you might achieve what he's calling you to. You need an example? How about Gideon? Gideon is he's threshing wheat in a wine press. The wine press is down in the valley. The wheat threshing's supposed to happen on top of he's a coward. He's afraid of his enemies. And the angel of God shows up to him and says, Gideon, you mighty warrior. What? Do you know who you're speaking to, God? You're calling me a mighty warrior? I don't even have enough strength. I don't even have enough courage to thresh wheat where I'm supposed to be. And oh, by the way, I'm the least of my entire tribe, and our tribe is the least in all of the Israelites. You talk about low of the low, and you're going to come here and tell me, mighty warrior? And the angel of God says to him something interesting. Go in the strength you have. Not go in the strength I'll give you. Not go in the strength you'll find. Go in the strength you already have. What am I saying to you? When God calls you to something, you already have everything you need to get to the other side. Listen, the same power that rose Jesus from the grave lives in me. That's the power of God living and working and breathing in my life. I already have everything that's necessary. But he used the what if. Suppose I go. And what if they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say? Now, last week we discussed Moses asking the question, who am I that I should go and lead them out of Egypt? And God responded, I will be with you. So let's see how God responds this week. Verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. I am who I am. Doesn't that kind of sound like a because I said so? It's kind of like because I said so, but it was actually for a different reason. It needed no further explanation. See, to the children of Israel, this phrase would have been interpreted differently than how we understand it today. God was using this statement to say to his people, I am who I've always been. I am who I've always been. For someone who's been walking with God for a while now, you're currently discouraged because of life circumstances, and you're starting to doubt God. Remember this, I am who I am, for I am who I've always been. If I was with you in a previous season of your life, I am with you now. I am unchanging. Just because your circumstances change, just because your situation has changed, just because your focus has shifted from me to the problem doesn't change who I am. I am who I am. It was like God saying to them, you've heard the stories of how I was with Abraham when I told him to leave his homeland and go to a land I will show him. Just as I was with Abraham, I am still that God. The same God. You've heard of how I wrestled with Jacob, how I changed his name to Israel, and how I gave him 12 sons that now represent the 12 tribes of Israel, who all of you are a part of. I'm still the same God that cared enough to come down from heaven and have that encounter with Jacob. I'm the same God because I am who I am. You've heard about the stories of how I was with Joseph when his brothers sold him into slavery, and I took what his brothers meant for evil and I turned it for good by elevating Joseph to second in the entire command of all of Egypt. Just like I took this bad situation that happened to Joseph and I turned it for the good, I'm still the God who turns things around. I am who I am. I am who I've always been. This statement would have sparked something in the Israelite elders. This would have given them hope that the God they've been crying out to, the one who they've been asking to deliver them for years, is finally answering their prayer. We struggle when God doesn't answer in our predetermined timeline of 2 weeks. These people have been praying for over 400 years. 400 years. See, sometimes the reason why God is silent is because we're not ready to listen. It took them 400 years to get themselves to a place where they would actually trust God enough to leave the confines of what was familiar and walk out into the unknown. Can you imagine? Over 400 years. Of course you can't imagine. We don't live that long. We don't know that. And it was unfortunate for them as well, because some of the people, all of the people that went into that situation didn't come out of that situation. They stayed there and they passed this on to their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren. And they heard these stories about God, just like we hear these stories about God now. And we wonder, why is he not doing it like he did for our ancestors? It's not time. It's not time. We become too comfortable in living in the familiar place of bondage instead of crying out and waiting on God to deliver us to the unknown. See, all this time, they could have seen who God was, because they could have seen him the way that he was based on the stories and experiences that they had heard about. But they couldn't see who God was because they viewed him through their own disappointment. They were viewing God from a position of their disappointment. And maybe someone is here today who doesn't see God for who he really is, because the enemy has convinced you of who he's not through your disappointment. You can't see or understand who God really is because the enemy has you so focused on your disappointment that now you're believing who he's not instead of who he is. But just because he hasn't met your expectations doesn't mean he hasn't working things out that you can't see. Listen, they're asking God to deliver them. And over 100 miles away, God is calling Moses to lead them out of their bondage. They don't see anything changing. But God's having a secret conversation that they can't know about, some 100 miles away, that's going to bring their deliverance. But all I can see is brick after brick after brick. All I can see is the slavery and bondage. And we're crying out to God, and nothing is changing. But it was changing. They just couldn't see it. They just couldn't see it changing. God was making a way where they couldn't see a way. And just because they couldn't see it, they're losing hope that it's ever going to happen. Listen, don't lose hope that it's going to happen. God's just not revealing all the ingredients yet. He's working over here to make it happen over here. And you're becoming discouraged over here because you can't see what's happening over here. And Moses is over here like, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And he's willing to throw away what's happening over here on his insecurity of what's happening over here. Listen, what God is calling you to over here might be exactly what someone's praying for over here. What you're praying for over here is a work that God is beginning in someone over here. How about I do it this way? This side of the room versus this side of the room. Raise your hand. I'm over here praying for God to do something in my life. And over here, you're asking God, but what if I do this thing? What about my insecurity? What would happen if I actually do this thing? God, I might be rejected. These people over here are like, listen, just do whatever it is because I'm praying for God to bring the miracle. And you're over here like, but I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if it'll happen in my strength. Listen, what if this side of the room is just waiting on you to say yes? What if this side of the room is just waiting on you to stop with the excuses? What if God wants to use this side of the room to bring the exact prayer that you've been asking for? But listen to me this morning. You can't see it happening. All you see is them sitting down and doing nothing. You're like, I don't understand, God. I've been asking for this for years. And it isn't happening. Now, am I saying that God is dependent on us doing exactly what he's... Listen, if you won't do it, turn to your neighbor and say, he'll use you instead. Come on, nudge him and say, he'll use you instead. God doesn't need you. I understand God doesn't need you. He wants to use you. He has given you everything you need. Go in the strength you have. He's given you all the resources necessary. And if you keep rejecting that, saying, God, I'm not going to do it because I'm not good enough, I don't have everything I need, then guess what? He'll just move it right on to somebody else. But God is allowing you the opportunity to be used because he knows the potential that lies inside of you. What you do with it is up to you. But just understand, the longer you sit and the longer you do nothing, the longer someone else may be sitting and thinking God has abandoned them. Whew, that wasn't even in my notes. I am who I am. Here's something else I found out in my studies this week. The word who in the I am who I am can carry several different meanings. The Hebrew word is asher. It can mean which, what, that, when, where, and how. I am which I am. I am what I am. I am that I am. I am when I am. I am where I am. I am how I am. In fact, the King James Version translates this, I am that I am. I am that I am. It's one of the only versions that uses this particular word when it says I am that I am. Now remember, the original manuscripts that we get all of our translations from don't include punctuation. So what if God is really trying to say to us today, I am that, comma, I am. I am that, comma, I am. The confirmation, I am that. I am exactly what you've been asking for. I am. Listen, when something gets said twice, it's to put emphasis so the reader understands, so that someone can hear that when God says I am, that means I am. And listen, I was going to use this as my 4 words, I am who I am. And I was like, somebody's going to say that's 5 words. But no, it's actually 2 words just being repeated over and over again. I am who I am. I am that. I am. You need shelter? I am that. I am. You need hope? I am that. I am. You need comfort in a time of need? I am that. I am. All of these things you've been asking for, God has been all of those things all along. And he's reminding somebody again this morning, I am that. I am. But I haven't given you my favorite translation of this word. My favorite translation, watch this. I didn't catch this until late last night. Actually, maybe it was even this morning. It's because. I am because I am. I am because I said so. I am because I said so. I am, but it won't make any sense if I tell you why I am. I could tell you, but it won't make any sense to you anyway because you're not there yet in your understanding to understand exactly what I am means. Listen, the Israelites were looking for some special name for God. What he was saying to them, I'm the same God you've read about. I'm the same God you've heard stories about. I'm the same God that was passed down from generation to generation. I am who I am. I am exactly what is needed for your situation. I'm glad God didn't put a greater definition on this particular passage of Scripture, because what it says to us is, whatever you need, I am. Whatever your situation is, I am. Whatever you've been asking for, I am. Everything you have need of, I am who I am. I am because I said so. I am because I said so. As the band comes up this morning and gets ready, I want to ask you this morning. I think God gave us quite a bit to roll over in our brain this morning. But what is God speaking to you right now? What jumped out to you most that you were like, ooh, that one was for me? And whatever that was, I want you to meditate on that for just a little bit. Maybe it is that you're living in a hypothetical situation. You don't even know what's going to happen, but you're allowing your fear and your fear of failure, your fear of rejection, to keep you stuck in the confines of what's familiar. Because in your mind, the enemy's tricked you and deceived you into believing that when you go and do that, you're going to be rejected anyway, and you're going to end up right back in this holding pattern of familiarity all over again. So why even venture out of the padded walls of familiarity? Because even if you do, you're going to come running right back to me anyway. Let's just stay here where it's safe. But listen, God didn't call us to what's familiar and comfortable for us. He told us to go. And maybe you're struggling with doing something God has called you to do for fear that what you find when you get there will be the rejection you're trying to run away from. And it will only confirm in your mind exactly what you've told yourself about yourself all this time. Well, listen, I'm believing that God is going to change that narrative in your life. Because God has already given you everything you need to get through what He's calling you to. Stop waiting on more strength. You already have strength. Stop waiting on more courage. You already have courage. Stop waiting on more peace. You already have peace. If God is calling you to it and you know it's God, He is telling you, just like He told Gideon, go in the strength you have. Why? Because there may be someone on the other side of the room, or someone on the other side of the state, or someone on the other side of the world that's praying for the answer that God is starting in you. God is creating this in you. Somebody else is praying. They can't see anything happening. They just keep asking God to do something. Make my situation change, God. And over here, you're kicking around whether or not you should do it or not do it. I don't know who I'm speaking to this morning. God doesn't reveal that stuff to me. But God has you doing something for the kingdom. And you might be saying, Pastor, I don't even know what it is. Well, let me ask you what you're doing right now. And if you say nothing, it's something more than nothing. It's something more than just being complacent. Well, I don't know. What am I supposed to do in the church? I don't know either. Maybe it's not even in the church. Maybe there's something else you're supposed to be doing outside of the church. I don't know. I can't limit God to that. But what if He's calling you to do something over here to help impact the life of someone over there? But listen, the devil is tricky. He's sneaky. We become so focused and distracted at the same time. Distracted by the world's vices. So focused on taking care of ourselves that we forget we weren't put here to make ourselves happy. Oh, that one hurts. We weren't put here for our comfort. We were put here to impact other people for the kingdom. That was our purpose. Not to keep running back to the confines of what's familiar. Not to keep running back there because we feel like it's quote unquote safe. God called you for a purpose. We become distracted by the what ifs. So instead of falling into the what ifs, we focus on what we think we can control. And because we're not doing what God has asked us to do, we become more and more distracted. We become more and more depressed. We become more and more irritated. So we continue to pour in to what we think will bring us the happiness and contentment that we want in our lives, only to figure out when we get it, it still didn't work. It still didn't give me what I thought it was going to give me. The new job didn't give me what I hoped it would. It was cool for like the first 24 hours, and then I realized I actually have to work. The relationship, I was like, this is going to be the one. And I get it, and like 2 weeks in, I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's not the one, but I think I can make it work because I can fix him. But guess what? It was never in the relationship. If I go back to that story of Elijah speaking in the whisper, he expected to find him in all the wrong places. And you keep looking to find God in all the wrong places. It wasn't in the earthquake. It wasn't in the wind. It wasn't in the fire. It was in the whisper. And you keep expecting to find your happiness, your contentment, your love, your joy, all of that you keep trying to find. I don't know why it shifted this way, but you keep looking for that to happen through something you can see with your own eyes. But that's not where it's going to come from. It's going to come from walking lockstep with Jesus Christ. It's going to come by finding my purpose and who He called me to be. It's going to come because I finally surrender enough to know that God is exactly all I ever needed all along. And when I finally start doing what God has called me to do, watch what happens. But listen, the enemy knows this. He knows the moment you see your true purpose, the moment you see your true identity and who God is calling you to be, he will lose his locking hold on you. So he keeps you distracted by thinking everything else is going to bring me what I'm looking for, when all along what you really need is just to surrender to the call God has for you on your life. Why? Because someone somewhere else is praying for what you're asking, what if, about. And I believe it's time we start moving in a different direction and stop asking what if and keep our focus on who God is. Because if He called you into this ministry, if He called you into this narrative, if He called you into what He's telling you to do, if He called you into it, He's not confused about the outcome. He's already there. Pastor, it doesn't make sense to me. It can't make sense to you. If it makes sense, you thought you could do it on your own. It's going to take faith in trusting Him, just like it took faith for Moses to start walking toward Egypt. Can you imagine that journey of over 100 miles, every step he's taking? The back of his mind thinking, what if they reject me? What if they reject me? Let me just go back. Let me just go back. But he didn't. He kept on in his purpose of doing exactly what God called him to do. I am because I am. I am because I said so. And maybe God's been revealing that to you in your life. You keep asking God questions. Why this? Why that? And you become like that little kid who just keeps asking, why? And maybe God's response back to you is, because I said so, and that's good enough. Why? Because you wouldn't understand even if I told you. You're not in the place of understanding what I have to show you and teach you about this new season of your life. So grow here. Grow in this moment. Grow right in this area. And at the right time, you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this word today. God, I believe it's going to be transformative in at least one individual today. Your word promises it will not return void. So I believe this morning the boomerang effect has hit at least one person in this room today. I know it hit me. But God, I'm believing this morning it's hit someone else. Someone who this morning hasn't understood I am who I am. Someone who's running from something in their life, their calling, something you're placing upon them. And just because they can't see the outcome, they keep pushing it off and saying no. Saying, what if this happens? What if that happens? God, I pray that you will give them the strength this morning to turn their what ifs into you will. What if it happens? You will provide.